you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Folks, Voss here from the Chris Voss Show.com. I don't know what that long thing was about. I just get bored sometimes, folks. We do 3 shows a week there. What do you want from me? Every now and then we got to have some fun with this lead-in. I'm getting tired of this this opera gal. Maybe we'll hire a ballet gal, but that might be weird because the show's mostly audio. And welcome to the show, my family and friends. For 28 to 100 episodes and 16 years, we bring in the Chris Voss Show because we want you to be smarter. We want the world to improve. We want goodness to prevail and people to be better to each other than human nature seems to have a habit of allowing. For the show to your family, friends, and relatives, don't make me pull the car over there and come back there. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Facebook.com/Chris Voss, and YouTube.com/Chris Voss. You can find all those wonderful things we built in 2008.
Opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the Chris Voss Show. Some guests of the show may be advertising on the podcast, but it is not an endorsement or review of any kind.
Given we have an amazing young man on the show, we're going to be talking to about his insights and learning. He's a learned gentleman. He even has a doctor. He's a doctor, so that makes him ultra smart. And I'm just an idiot podcaster with a mic. Dr. David Arthur Kent joins us on the show. His book is out November 3rd, 2025. It's called Why Me? The Brain on Tilt. I think that was the first rendition draft title of the podcast. The Brain on Tilt. We're going to get into it with him, find out some insights on his books and how he can help you deal with maybe some of the issues you're having, mental illness or other things. I mean, you're listening to the show, so clearly there's something mentally wrong with you or mentally right with you. That or somewhere in between. But we'll find out because he's a psychiatrist. See how I did that? Yeah, I just worked that right out. Mr. Dr. David Kent is a board-certified psychiatrist, 30 years of clinical expertise in mental health treatment and neuropsychiatry. Founder and owner of New Me TMS clinics in Idaho, specializing in advanced brain stimulation therapies for treatment-resistant mental illnesses. That was also the second draft of what we're going to title the podcast before we settle on the Chris Voss Show. Because we just kind of figured if you say the Chris Voss Show, we figure that there's some brain stimulation and mental illnesses going on there. Anyway, Dr. David Kent, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you referencing me as a young man.
Yeah.
That's very kind of you. Very kind.
It's an old Carson trick we learned. Gas up the guests, make them feel really good, and they shine. So that's what we do. Flattery gets us everywhere.
It's working for sure.
We want people to feel good about being on the show. So give us your .coms, David. Where do you want people to find you on the interwebs? 2
places. For my book, I have it at davidkentauthor.com. And that takes you to my author book website. You get some background on myself as well as the book and then how to get the book. And then my clinic in Idaho is newmetms.com. It's NUME, that's the NUME part, newmetms.com. And that's my clinical practice, at least part of my clinical practice. So that's the 2 ways to find me.
And as long as we're using terms, what does TMS stand for? The New Me TMS clinic you have, what is the TMS part?
TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's been around for quite a long time. It's FDA approved since 2008. Wow. It's being used worldwide, so it's always surprising to me when people haven't heard of it. But it suffers from an awareness problem. That's the big problem.
That's why you're here, right?
That's why I'm here.
Let us know what this is and how it can work. Now, is this just where I hit people over the head with a magnet and they get better or worse, or?
So to speak, it's highly developed. It's actually the most well-researched treatment of all time in psychiatry, probably. Well over 100,000 worldwide papers. It uses an electromagnetic device that targets a specific part of the brain that's underperforming, so to speak, and it stimulates it in such a way that it takes it to the gym and it works it out.
Oh.
And when it actually works, it stays working for months or even years with or without any further intervention, which is kind of amazing. We call that durability.
Yeah.
And the other nice thing about one more thing is there are no long-term side effects to TMS, never ever been discovered. And that's highly unusual. Everything has long-term side effects, just not TMS.
Yeah. So does my Red Bull I'm drinking.
That's the 30-minute or 30-second to elevator pitch right there.
TMS, FDA approved. And so you have all these devices in your office that help fix the brain. Do you think there's anything you can do for the people on Twitter? Because we've been over there, and I'm not sure brains are even. Do you have to have a brain to use the service?
I just don't know if the science has evolved yet to do that.
You have to have a brain to start. You have to have a starting point. So give us like a 30,000 overview. What's inside this book of yours? Why me?
It took me a minute to think about this. I wanted to write a book for a while, but just didn't feel like I could. But there was no book out there written by a psychiatrist about mental illness in general. But I didn't want to write something dry, or I didn't want to write a textbook. I wrote it in such a way that it hit the major mental illnesses. But each chapter, not every chapter, but about half the chapters are in story fashion. So they're about an individual who struggles with, say, depression or bipolar or OCD or borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia, things like that. And so it's relatable. People resonate with it. It kind of tells a journey. But before that, I talk about the brain science around mental illness, because there's a real brain science around it. And then the last few chapters are about what families can do and how they can support and have the resources they need to help their loved one. So it's kind of a journey through the book. It's not very long. It takes about an hour and a half to read the book. It's 11 chapters. At the very end of the book, there's an appendix with an enormous amount of resources. And the thing I say about the book is it's not my opinion and it's not my belief system. It's an authoritative, evidence-based book. And so there's over 200 sightings in the book of research behind the book. And if even my colleagues came along and said, I don't think this part's true, I would change it if it weren't true. So I always want to keep it up to date and sort of current contemporary science behind it.
And those FDA approvals there. I don't know if that's to me, I don't know. An FDA approval seems like it should be like, a standard of what you could maybe trust. So some people.
Yeah, I only recommend, there are some non-FDA things, but I only recommend pretty much FDA approved things. And then, but this whole book is about evidence-based treatment. So if there's no evidence behind it, I don't put it in the book. Only stuff that's based on evidence.
Now, do you also talk in the book about ECT? And if so, tell us what that is.
Yeah, I do talk about ECT. I really talk about everything. I don't really leave anything out because I don't think that's fair. ECT stands for electroconvulsive therapy. It's been around since the 1950s and developed over the 70s and 80s to what it is today. It uses electricity to stimulate the brain to go into a grand mal seizure. This is all currently done under anesthesia with some muscle blockers, so you don't have a real full-on seizure.
Wow.
It's also quite safe. Over time, you run the risk of having some problems with the short-term memory loss, which is also reversible. But that can limit how much you can do with the ECT. But it's still in heavy use today. I consult on it, and I've done it since the 1980s. So I've done a lot of ECT. Wow. So anything related to biological interventions and mental illness would be my expertise. All these things.
I'm going to send you everyone. I've been texting on my phone. Now, who are the patients that these treatments are ideal for? Is there a certain targeted group or just anyone with the brain, or how does that work?
It's definitely defined. ECT is primarily for major depression or refractory depression. We sometimes use it for kind of runaway mania, but that's pretty rare. It's really more used for people who haven't responded to medications and other treatments for depression, and they get quite hopeless and suicidal. So that's primarily how it's used. TMS started out being used exclusively for depression. It's also quite powerful. However, they found other places in the brain that it's also good for. It's also good for OCD, and it's been FDA approved for that.
Oh, wow.
And so depression and OCD, there's a company out of Israel called Brainsway that's also developed an FDA approval for smoking cessations. Oh, wow. We think it'll dovetail into other addictions. So that's kind of an exciting aspect of it as well.
Now, the first thing, the TMS, that's designed to reactivate the brain in certain sections that aren't activating properly. Is that correct understanding that I?
Yeah, that's the simplistic way of looking at it. Is it does stimulate the brain in a targeted fashion, and we call it circuits in the brain. These are all fairly new concepts that the brain actually has circuits, and TMS targets a particular circuit, usually stimulating it. Sometimes there are certain circuits we want to inhibit or slow down, but in general, we tend to stimulate the circuit. And what we found over time is it actually causes neuroplasticity in that circuit, meaning that the anatomy actually changes. And that's why TMS can have a long-lasting benefit, not just short term, but long term.
Now, does it help people with schizophrenia, bipolar disease, stupidity, et cetera, or just maybe the first two?
I haven't seen a stupidity indication yet. Schizophrenia, not so far. It doesn't really treat psychosis.
Oh, really?
In terms of bipolar, it is effective for bipolar depression, just as it is for regular depression. And I've seen that myself firsthand with people. So it does have that. The FDA has been slow to approve that for bipolar, but it does work in my experience. And it also works for obsessive compulsive disorder. The TMS does. And I actually got one of the first machines in the United States to treat OCD. And that's why my name will appear in some of the research papers, because I supplied data to the company that did that.
Now, this is pretty wild, this EMP stuff. It's like an induced stroke. Is that correct? I mean, it's controlled, but...
You mean the TMS?
Yeah, or no, is it the EMP or the TMS that's the controlled stroke? Is it I think I'm getting my terms mixed.
I think you're getting them mixed up. I don't know what the controlled stroke is, but TMS is heavily controlled. We control the parameters around it really tightly. Yeah. And the standards that I follow are worldwide standards. And there's never been found to be a long-term side effect of TMS, which is pretty remarkable, especially since it's such an impactful treatment. You would expect something to be kind of amiss a little bit, but there just isn't. In fact, more is probably better with TMS. So that's also unusual. Usually more is not always better with medications. It often makes things worse if you go too high, because you start getting side effect problems.
Okay. I guess the ECT, what was it?
Oh, you're talking about ECT.
ECT is the induced current.
Yeah, it's electrical shock kind of thing in the brain. It causes the brain to go into an epileptic seizure. Jeez. And the seizure is felt to be therapeutic, and it is for depression. And it is under control. So if it goes on too long, we stop it with medication. So it's a very controlled setting. Anesthesia is involved. Patients don't really feel any discomfort. And we've been doing it for forever. So we're really good at it. And I've done it forever myself. Yeah. I don't do it so much anymore, but I've done it a lot of treatments. I've been involved with it a lot. Wow. I understand the parameters around it pretty well.
That's pretty wild. I had a dog that had seizures. I didn't know that we had a way to induce that. Does it help with schizophrenia and bipolar then? And
not so much with schizophrenia, but it can help with bipolar depression, or like I said earlier, if you have really an uncontrolled mania. I saw it once. I've only done it once in my career. We had a really manic lady back at my training at Iowa. The meds just would not touch her at all. And we decided to do ECT, and she walked out of the hospital like nothing had ever happened. She did awesome. So I've seen where it could work there, but we don't use it that way much because we have a lot of medications at our disposal these days.
Do you find that, why does this work? I mean, we talk a lot about in the discussions we've had over the years, we've done 1 or 2 episodes where we talk about how the body keeps score and how the body will house trauma, will house damage, and it seems to make it almost a physical part of itself, or at least there's like an anchor there for the repetition of the thing that's in a physical thing. Is this part of that, where the body's keeping the score in the brain and there's certain elements that aren't functioning properly because of something maybe?
I think it's partly true like that. The brain can be really entrenched. Most of the depressions that we treat today that are long-term, they're long-term. And a lot of patients will tell me that dates back to adolescence or even childhood, early adulthood, and then they might be 50, 60, 70 years old and they still have it. So it becomes entrenched, really entrenched. But the remarkable thing with TMS is it doesn't really matter. If they could be 80 and they could come out of their depression with TMS after all those decades. So TMS has a unique way of working. It helps rewire the circuit that's defective. On the medication side, we've always had this party line that it's chemical imbalance, and there's some maybe truth to that, but they haven't really shown it that way. We just know that these medicines affect different neurotransmitters in the brain, and of course in our gut as well, because they have the exact same neurotransmitters as our brain. So that science is still unclear at times. We have data to show that they work, but we don't really know how they work. If I give you an aspirin and your headache gets better, we don't really know how. We've been using aspirin for decades, or I give you ibuprofen, we don't know exactly how it works, or Tylenol for that matter. We just know that they do work. And so that's some of the challenge we have still.
Oh, okay.
But with TMS, we know more about that than anything else in terms of its mechanism, how it works, where it works. We can show it on brain scans that it works. It's just pretty phenomenal. But outside of that, it starts to become a little muddier, so to speak.
The brain's kind of one of those things I think we're still trying to figure it all out.
The brain is sort of the last frontier, in my opinion, because it's highly complex. And in my book, I talk about the brain. I talk about how complex it is. And it's considered one of the most complex pieces of machinery in the universe, at least as far as we know. Even though we have supercomputers or AI that can do amazing things, it takes a tremendous amount of computing power to even come close to what our brain can do. And our brain is only 3 pounds.
Yeah.
And it doesn't use near the energy that, say, a supercomputer uses. So we still have a huge advantage over the rest of the universe. And so that's why it's going to take us a minute to figure this thing out.
Yeah. And it's not, you can do a readout on it and stuff, or you can diagnose it with where you get like a car readout that tells you the error codes.
But that day seems to be coming. So really? I don't think it's going to be very long. You're starting to get these neuro interfaces, and the neuroimaging is getting more sophisticated, and they couple that with electrical mapping of the brain with neuroimaging, and we're getting closer and closer. And I think genetics play a huge role, but we can start to see how genetics play out and what the blueprint looks like. And so I think it's coming. I really do.
My sister has MS, and one of the problems with MS, and I'm not a doctor, so you can correct me all you want, but basically what it does is a lot of it is a misfiring across the cushioning system of the brain. There's like a gel or something that, I don't know, it sits in or something. It sounds like some science physics movie. And then it goes down the spine. There's kind of like a protective thing. And I guess to my understanding with MS, there's scar tissue and scars that develop across that membrane, and it randomizes different things. Like one day my sister's leg won't work, the next day her eye won't work, the next day it's something else. And is there any way to maybe repair stuff like MS or Alzheimer's, dementia, things of that nature as we age?
MS falls under the category of an autoimmune disease. So the body's attacking itself.
Wow.
Just like rheumatoid arthritis is attacking our joints, we have different autoimmune disorders that turn on ourselves. And so in MS, the immune system's turning on the brain, and that's why, but it migrates. So, if you look at an MRI of someone with MS, you'll see these little lakes in the brain where you have these MS spots, and that's where the brain is being attacked at that particular time. But over time, it migrates and changes. That's why your sister's symptoms aren't consistently always. It's not like she had a stroke in a part of the brain and it's just fixed. It's kind of just taking turns, targeting different areas of the brain, which we don't really understand why. But it's really an autoimmune process. Until we can understand the autoimmune process better, which I think we will, I think we'll start to learn why the immune system turns on itself and how to shut it off.
Yeah,
I have rheumatoid arthritis, so I have to take medication to keep it in check. Otherwise, my joints would be disfigured and I'd be in a lot of pain all the time. But because of the drugs, at least it tones it down, so I can function normally, thankfully. But someday I'm hoping that they'll have a cure for it, just like for your sister.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. The brain can be affected by so many things. There's strokes, there's infection,
stupidity,
there's brain trauma, there's autoimmune diseases, there's ruptured aneurysms. There's just so many things that can go wrong with the brain. And so the more we understand it, the better we can have answers to help people.
That's another good question you kind of trigger me on there. Can it help with brain trauma? I've had some friends that have gotten brain trauma, and it's changed their lives indefinitely, forever. We've had people on the show that have written books about their children getting brain trauma and what it was like to try and circumvent it all and understand it all. And is there any help for brain trauma patients?
I think TMS is being researched worldwide. It's one of the most heavily researched brain treatments ever. So there's thousands of researchers around the world. Even neurosurgeons use TMS to some extent, trying to see how it would help with people who've had a stroke or damage to the brain. There's some preliminary data to suggest that there's possibilities of that. I still think they have a lot to work out in terms of protocols. There's several different devices, TMS devices in the world. One is called the figure-8 coil. The other one's the BrainsWay's H coils. And they both have value. The figure-8 coils are much more accurate, like a scalpel. And BrainsWay's going to act a little bit more broadly and hit more tissue and target areas that those figure-8 coil can't target. So I think there's hope that some of this stuff was going to make a difference in somebody who's had potentially brain trauma. It depends on where the trauma was, as well as strokes to some degree, depending on how sizable the stroke is.
Yeah.
Because if you lose too much tissue, you may not get it back.
Yeah, that's true. It was interesting to me. My first friend had gotten it. I never heard of brain trauma, brain injury sort of thing. I don't know what the correct term is, but I remember, we used to go to lunch all the time, hang out, have a coffee, shoot the shit. We just, great friend. We were going to write a book together before my book, and he drinking a bunch of vodka at home. I've been guilty of the same thing. And I guess he passed out in his kitchen and he fell backwards and slammed his head into the floor. And he woke up with blood coming out of his ear, and he had bleeding on the brain, and they had to go in, and I think that actually made it worse. They had to go in and drain the blood from the brain. They were concerned about it, but it gave him this permanent thing, and suddenly he couldn't go out anymore. Anything with lots of noise, overstimulation would really muck him up. And so we couldn't hang out anymore. And if I did, it was like, 10, 15 minutes. And he'd be like, Chris, I'm overwhelmed. I got to go. And I understand, I just had to understand his condition, but it was even more shocking to know that it was lifelong. I guess it's good. A lot of these things are being developed and have been developed. How long does it take for me to do one of these if I qualify for this sort of treatment? And
like TMS, you mean?
Yeah, the TMS.
Yeah, TMS. All insurances cover 36 treatments, depending on the manufacturer, but it's typically a 20-minute session, 5 days a week. So it's about 6 or 7 weeks of treatment. It's 20 minutes a day. So you have to be willing to commit to that. But most people are, because the people who come forward have failed everything else. So they're pretty desperate. I've had people come even from out of state to come treat with me, and it was worth it. But I've got a guy now who's driving about 2 hours a day one way for the last 2.5 months to get treatment.
Wow.
So people can get real desperate when they feel hopeless and they don't see any way out of this. So so people who live in my area, it's a no-brainer. I'll just go get a 20-minute treatment and go back to everything else I do.
Now, the procedure, according to Google here, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, I guess, or Google's right and wrong, because sometimes it is wrong, folks, big surprise, is there's a device that goes onto the head that delivers electromagnetic pulses to the prefrontal cortex, which regulates mood. Now, I remember when I suffer from massive depression, OCD, ADHD. I still have massive ADHD, but we try and manage it as best we can with vodka. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that, folks. I used to. Anyway, and the one thing I learned about being on Zoloft and taking depression medicine was part of what was going on with my prefrontal cortex was it was being overwhelmed with data information. And so instead of having a clean flow through here, it was just bogging down nasty. It was like, trying to ram 50,000 ships through a dam. and you're like, that flow's not going to work there, buddy. Is that a good analogy of what's taking place with this procedure of TMS?
Kind of. I mean, the initial discovery of TMS was in 1985 in London, England, where they found a defective area in the left, what they call the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. They got kind of lucky. They found it. A psychiatrist out of South Carolina helped develop the technology named Mark George. They started treating it. They did double-blind placebo-controlled trials to show that it was better than placebo. They proved that. Then the world took notice, and it just exploded from there. And so the prefrontal cortex is really critical in a lot of things when it comes to mental illness, depression, schizophrenia, and other things. It's the last part of the brain to develop in humans. And so it develops in late adolescence, early 20s, about 2 years later in males than females. And so it's kind of the breaks, like shows once it develops, you start to have a little bit better judgment, maybe a little more cautious. And that's why in adolescent males, they're not so cautious because that part of the brain is not fully developed yet. Yeah. So it plays a lot of different functions and roles, but it's super critical. And yeah, we do target that with TMS, but there's some other locations that we can also target. There's the cingulate gyrus that also has the depression and an OCD circuit. And it takes a specialized coil to hit that. But only BrainsWay is the only one who's really developed that. And I use a BrainsWay device. But again, we're starting to find different circuits in the brain that do different functions. And the science just keeps marching forward. So that's the exciting part.
Now, schizophrenia is a big deal. Sadly, I have a good friend on Facebook that I've known for probably 10 years. He's a Silicon Valley guy, and his daughter has schizophrenia, and she's literally gone off her meds and walking the streets and disappeared, and they're trying to find her, and they found her clothes. So they're even more worried now about where she's at. And I've had employees that have had family members with schizophrenia and heard the stories, and it's heartbreaking in a lot of cases. Is this pretty helpful, or some of the work? I noticed there's a schizophrenia chapter in the book here, chapter 6.
There is. TMS hasn't been shown to be helpful to schizophrenia. That could change. But still medications. And we treat what we call the positive symptoms. That's the psychosis piece. And even that, we don't always fully control it, but we often dampen it or even get rid of the psychosis. It's the negative symptoms of schizophrenia that are notoriously difficult to treat. That's the lack of motivation, the lack of sex drive, the lack of social abilities. They become really that's the disabling part of it. Until scientists can figure that piece out, we're still going to struggle with it. But without medicines and leaving them psychotic, it's even worse. So we partially treat it enough to kind of keep them hopefully off the streets. Yeah. But it takes a village for that to happen.
Oh, it does.
We call it a downward drift. The more they go off their meds, the more they drift downward. And they're almost inevitably homeless at that point. So it's very, very difficult on families. But with the right support, the right medicines, a lot of times that can be avoided.
Yeah, it's great they have something for this to deal with the prefrontal cortex. I was reading how my medication would slow it down, and this is great for people that they have like severe depression and other issues that have not responded to medication. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that was from the Mayo Clinic. Back in the day, what they would do to fix stuff like this is a frontal lobotomy, and that's what my psychiatrist still says I need. But
not such a good idea. No, we've kind of moved away from that. We used to do ice baths. We used to do all kinds of things. Yeah. I worked at a state hospital when I was a resident in the 1980s in Iowa, and it was like a turn of the century facility, and they had different buildings on campus, huge sprawling campus. And they had these tunnels underneath to connect the different buildings. And at night, I'd have to go down these dark tunnels. And you could see where they used to have chains on the wall. They chained them to the wall.
Oh, my God.
They had on one of the floors, on the top floors where they didn't use them anymore. It's kind of like a museum. You could see these ice baths they would use and these things they would use. Very barbaric, right? But they didn't have any medicines. They didn't have anything to do. They did exorcisms, they did whatever they thought they could do because they really were struggling with really nothing at their disposal other than taking them out of society.
Yeah.
That's really all they could do.
And trying to keep them from injuring themselves. My sister was born with cerebral palsy, and she would hit herself in the head over and over again. You'd have to get her to stop. The one of the frontal lobes, that prefrontal cortex, that really seems to affect a lot of people. And so I'm glad there's something like this. So they come in the office. Now, these are people can't telemedicine in for this. They have to show up to an office that's localized, whether it's your office in Idaho or maybe other offices they can find around the world.
Yeah, they have to get to a machine. Where people who do TMS, there's several forms of TMS. There's brainwaves deep TMS. That's what I do. I find it to be, research has shown it to be a little bit more reliable because it doesn't miss the target as much. And then there's figure eight coils, which have been around forever. And so you can Google it, TMS in your area, look for providers. If you go to Brainsway's site, they have, you put your zip code in and it'll find you a Brainsway provider. And I think that they are a good place to start for sure.
I'm going to start referring stupid people to you I found on Twitter.
You're ask. That's a big ask right there. That's a big ask.
Yeah, you got to have a brain first, folks. Anyway, now tell us about this magnet. You've mentioned the coiled magnet a few times. Can I just take 5 refrigerator magnets and kind of just put them up against my head and go to sleep for a while? And will that work?
Or they're not like the traditional magnet. They're a type of electromagnet, and they use a certain geometry configuration. Because you don't want just this broad, wide magnetic field, because then you're just using a shotgun. And because with TMS, it targets specific areas of the brain. So it has to be a fairly narrow beam. Anybody can actually build a figure eight coil. It's unpatented. So you could build that in your garage if you knew what you're doing. And you could use it. You just wouldn't know what you're doing. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. Now, the Brainsway device is not a figure eight coil. It is patented. They use these H coils inside of a helmet. So you can't build those without violating a patent violation. And you probably wouldn't know what you're doing anyways. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to those. But the figure eight coils, technically, you could build legally. It just wouldn't know how to use them.
Yeah. All right. So fridge magnets are out then. Go to professional peoples. Yeah. Yeah, it's magnetic fields, and the brain runs on electricity, right?
It's an electrochemical organ.
If you have one on Twitter. So how can people onboard with you? How can they reach out? How can they find out more? And then maybe if they can work with you and your services, handshake.
If they're, my area or whatever, obviously they can contact they can go to my website, TMS.com, and you can do a self-assessment. You can reach out to us through email. There's a phone number on there. They could call us. If you want more information on my book, you go to davidkettauthor.com. And at the bottom, there's also a way to email me through that. So there's several ways to contact me. I certainly can't give out my private phone number and have it not be called a zillion times. What?
Yeah, that happens.
I get a ton of spam calls, so I wouldn't even be able to discern who's real and who isn't real.
I can't even answer the phone anymore unless it's somebody close to me. Oh, my mom, I know her.
And force people to leave messages, and that way I can sort it out.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I get all these spam calls with AT&T, and I'll even say, we're pretty sure this is a spam call. Do you want to accept it? And you're like, if you're sure it's a spam call, why am I getting the ring? What's going on here? I thought,
I get that. I get that too.
I don't know why. And we had a telemarketing agency with a mortgage company in the 2000s and late 1900s, and they invoked that do not call list. And I'm like, how are these people still allowed to call me like after 26 years? Anyway,
I know. I get that.
That's a different show.
That's a different show. That affects my mental health, that's for sure.
I might need some of that electrical therapy because it's funny. You never take their call and you always send it to spam, and they'll just keep calling from other numbers. And it's like, how many times do you have to call with me not answering to determine that I'm savvy onto you as to what your game is? And I'm never going to answer.
But they're using robocallers, so they don't care.
Yeah,
the machines are doing it, not them.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
So as we go out, give people a final pitch out to pick up your book and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I do. I think it's very much, it resonates with people. I want anybody to read it because it helps you understand mental illness far, far better. It helps you understand anybody you know. Everybody's touched by it. So I just really feel like you'd get a lot out of it. And I think you know people. It gives you also language on how to talk to each other That's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. The evidently, bud, give it out for Christmas and Thanksgiving. That way, when you go to your dinners there at Thanksgiving and Christmas, maybe they'll be better.
We have Easter coming up, and we have St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. I tried a lot of electric shock therapy when I was a kid, but it was mostly me stuck in a fork I licked into a socket, and that did not make me smarter.
So that where the curly hair came from?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much.
Okay.
That's why I wear a hat. So good setup there. But yeah, folks, that didn't work. So just a word to the wise. I also sucked on those tasty lead paint chips my grandpa had me peel off the house.
Yeah, those are really nice. Really
Right now, my audience is going, everything's starting to come together and make sense here after 16 years. Dr. David Kent, thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate being on.
Thank you. And thanks, Jonas, for tuning in. Order up his book, Why Me? The Brain on Tilt, out November 3rd, 2025. And maybe we should rename the podcast that. The Brain on Tilt podcast. I don't know. Do you have a podcast yet, Doctor?
I do not. It's a lot of work to do a podcast. I can't catch up to someone like you. You've done it for 16 years. How could I catch up to that? I did do a radio show for 5 months. I hosted a radio show for a while, but it was so much work. I said, I just can't do it.
If I ever get hit by a bus or lightning, you'll be able to catch up eventually. But no, the Brain on Tilt, that would be a great podcast name. That's all I'm saying.
It could be. Yeah. Good title.
Welcome to the Brain on Tilt. Then you get that guy from Let's Get Ready to Rumble to do your intro.
But I would need your voice to do that. I don't think I have that.
Let's get ready. I don't want to get sued. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Doc, for coming to the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Facebook.com/Chris Voss, and YouTube.com/Chris Voss. And remember, if you don't refer your family, friends, or relatives, get them to sign up for the show, I'll haunt you in your nightmares. Threatening your audience always works, Chris. Anyway, guys, good. We certainly appreciate you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the most amazing, intelligent podcast ever made to improve your brain and your life. Warning, consuming too much of the Chris Voss Show podcast can lead to people thinking you're smarter, younger, and irresistible sexy. Consume in regularly moderated amounts. Consult a doctor for any resulting brain bleed.
All right, Doc. Good job.